Sometimes one Instagram story can unravel your entire life. I thought I was being clever, calling out controlling behavior while living my truth. Turns out screenshots last forever, and some secrets have a way of destroying everything you thought you had under control. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my videos, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I'm Annabelle, 26, and I've been living with my boyfriend Clayton for the past year in our downtown apartment. We split everything 50-50, which I thought was pretty progressive of us. Clayton's 29 and works in some corporate office job that requires him to wear those awful polo shirts every day. The man has zero sense of style, but whatever. He pays his half of the bills. Here's the thing about Clayton. He's become incredibly clingy lately, always wanting to know where I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with. It's suffocating, honestly. I mean, I get it. My ex used to track my every move, so I'm sensitive to that kind of controlling behavior. But Clayton takes it to another level with his constant questioning and need for updates. Look, I'll admit I've had a few situations where I needed him to pick me up late at night. 4 times in 2 months, actually. Each time I'd been out with friends and something would go wrong. They'd abandon me at some club or party, leaving me stranded and drunk at 2 a.m. Clayton would throw on clothes and drive across town to get me, which I appreciated, but then he'd lecture me about being more careful. After the 5th incident, he suggested we share our locations with each other for safety. I lost it. You don't trust me. This is so toxic. My ex used to track me everywhere. The conversation ended there because I wasn't about to let another man monitor my every move. But then I started noticing his behavior patterns. He'd drive past my workplace after his gym sessions, claiming it was on his way home when it clearly wasn't. He'd ask detailed questions about my day, wanting to know specific names and places. When I'd mention hanging out with my friend Marissa, he'd casually bring up seeing her Instagram stories from completely different locations. It felt like he was building some kind of case against me. The man has this obsessive need to control every aspect of our relationship. He tracks our expenses down to the penny schedules, everything weeks in advance, and gets genuinely upset when plans change spontaneously. He's one of those guys who thinks being responsible makes him attractive, but really, it just makes him insufferable. 2 weeks ago, I'd had enough. I was supposedly at a work conference in Chicago, sending him photos throughout the day to keep him updated like the good girlfriend I am. I posted an Instagram story that said, "Why do guys always want to know where you are so controlling?" I tagged my 3 closest friends and watched the likes roll in. 47 people agreed with me, including several of my coworkers who've met Clayton and seen his possessive behavior firsthand. The validation felt incredible. Here were dozens of people confirming what I already knew, that Clayton's behavior was toxic and controlling. I screenshotted some of the supportive comments and saved them to show him later when he inevitably brought up his trust issues again. What Clayton didn't know was that I wasn't actually in Chicago. I was 15 minutes away at the downtown Marriott with Preston, someone who actually makes me feel alive. Preston doesn't ask boring questions about my schedule or expect me to check in every few hours. He's exciting, spontaneous, and treats me like a woman instead of a child who needs constant supervision. I'd been seeing Preston for about 8 months, and the difference between him and Clayton was night and day. Where Clayton was rigid and controlling, Preston was free-spirited and adventurous. He didn't care about splitting bills down to the penny or scheduling our time together weeks in advance. With Preston, everything felt natural and unforced. The hotel room photos I'd been sending Clayton were from a previous business trip, carefully curated to maintain the illusion. I'd taken dozens of generic hotel shots months ago, knowing they might come in handy someday. The conference materials were easy enough to fake with a quick Google search and some creative photography. Between us, I'd been building a narrative with my family about Clayton's possessive behavior for months. Little comments here and there about how he didn't trust me, how he needed to know my every move, how he made me feel suffocated. I wasn't lying. He really was controlling. But I may have emphasized certain incidents to make him look worse. My mom, Stella, had started asking questions about whether Clayton was good for me and suggesting I deserved someone who gave me more freedom. My friends were already on my side, having witnessed his interrogations whenever we went out together. I was just protecting myself in case things went south with our relationship. That evening, I felt victorious scrolling through the continued support on my Instagram story. People were sharing their own experiences with controlling partners, and several friends were encouraging me to know my worth and not settle for someone who didn't respect my independence. I came home that night expecting to find Clayton waiting up for me, probably with more questions about Chicago and my conference experience. Instead, I found the apartment empty. His work clothes were still hanging in the closet, but some of his casual things were missing. There was no note, no text, nothing. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe he'd finally gotten the message about backing off and giving me space. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled in to watch Netflix, enjoying the rare, quiet evening without his constant presence and questions. But then my phone started ringing, my mom calling repeatedly. I ignored the first few calls, assuming she wanted to chat about something mundane. When she called for the 7th time, I finally answered. "Annabelle, sweetie, what's going on?" Clayton's saying some concerning things. "What do you mean?" "What did he say?" "He sent me your Instagram story and asked me to tell you he won't be asking where you are anymore. Then he said something about Chicago that I don't understand." My stomach dropped. "What about Chicago?" "He asked me to ask you about the conference. Which panels were your favorites, things like that. But honey, you're not in Chicago." The silence stretched between us. I could feel my carefully constructed story crumbling in real time. "Mom, it's complicated. Clayton's been really controlling lately, and I think he's trying to turn you against me." "Annabelle, he showed me your location history from your shared Netflix account. You logged in from the Marriott downtown yesterday at noon. The conference started at 9 in Chicago, and it's a 3-hour flight." I hung up. My hands were shaking as I stared at my phone, watching missed calls and texts pile up from my mom, my sister, and several friends. Clayton had somehow turned everyone against me with his paranoid conspiracy theories. The truth is, I'd been feeling trapped in our relationship for months. Clayton's need to control every aspect of our lives was suffocating me. When I met Preston at a work event, he represented everything Clayton wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, willing to take risks. Preston made me remember what it felt like to be desired instead of monitored. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Stay in a relationship where I felt more like a prisoner than a partner? Clayton never wanted to do anything fun or exciting. He'd rather stay home and plan our budget than go out and actually live our lives. Preston showed me what I was missing. The next morning brought 73 missed calls and over 200 texts. I read one from my mom: "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." Here's what I learned later through the family grapevine. Clayton had told my mom everything about the late-night pickups, about my lies regarding whereabouts, about finding discrepancies in my stories for weeks. He had presented evidence like some kind of detective showing her location data and timeline inconsistencies that painted me as a serial liar. Brinnin Freitaden. My mom had apparently done her own investigation after that, checking my iPad that was still logged into the family iCloud account. She'd found months of messages between Preston and me, photos, plans to meet at the Marriott whenever his wife Heather was at her prenatal appointments. And that's right, Preston was married. But before you judge me, you need to understand the full situation. He told me his marriage was essentially over, that they were staying together for the kids, but living separate lives. He said Heather was cold and distant, that they hadn't been intimate in over a year. I wasn't breaking up a happy marriage. I was helping someone find happiness again. When I went back to the apartment to grab more clothes, I found Marissa on our couch wearing Clayton's Columbia hoodie, eating leftover Thai food from our fridge. Her boyfriend was in our shower like they owned the place. "Oh, you're here," Marissa said without looking up from her phone. "Clayton said you'd moved out. He said I could crash here for a few days. I live here, Marissa. I pay half the rent. Well, this is awkward. Christian's in the shower. The audacity was unbelievable. Not only had Clayton abandoned me without warning, but he'd given my best friend permission to use our apartment as her personal hotel. I took photos of everything. Marissa in Clayton's clothes, Christian walking out of my bathroom in a towel, the state they'd left our living space in. That night, Clayton finally called from his actual number instead of whatever Google Voice thing he'd been using. "You need to stop harassing my friends," I told him immediately. Harassing, I went to my apartment that I pay rent for. "You abandoned me, Clayton. You don't get to just waltz back in whenever you want." "You were supposed to be in Chicago. Remember the conference you sent me photos from?" The silence stretched between us. I could have explained everything, then could have told him about Preston and how suffocated I'd been feeling. Instead, I said, "I don't have to explain myself to you. You're the one who involved my mother in our personal business." "Right, because posting about our relationship to your 1,200 Instagram followers is totally different." "That's not the same thing. Your mom actually cares about you. Your Instagram followers just want drama." I hung up, but 20 minutes later, I got a text from an unknown number, "Stay away from the apartment or I'll call the cops." The legal threat was the last straw. I forwarded the message to my friend who works in legal services, and she confirmed that Clayton couldn't legally ban me from my own residence. But the damage was already done. He'd turned everyone against me with his victim narrative. Over the next few days, the situation spiraled completely out of control. My mom froze my credit card, saying if I was adult enough to cheat, I was adult enough to pay my own bills. My sister stopped returning my calls. Friends who'd been supportive of my Instagram post suddenly went quiet when they learned the full story. Preston's wife Heather found out about us and showed up at the apartment while I was there collecting my things. The woman was 7 months pregnant and absolutely unhinged with rage. "You little witch," she said, catching the door when I tried to close it. "I trusted you. I invited you to my home." "Heather, please, it just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far." "For 8 months, it just happened for 8 months." I was crying by then, the ugly kind where you can't catch your breath. "He said you were getting divorced. He said you hadn't been intimate in years." Heather actually laughed. "I'm 7 months pregnant, you absolute fool." She left after informing me that Preston had been served with divorce papers and that my relationship would be featured prominently in court proceedings. Apparently, destroying a family when there's a baby involved doesn't play well with judges. The next few days were a blur of angry texts and voicemails. My friends weren't so supportive anymore once they learned I'd been sleeping with a married man whose wife was pregnant. Suddenly, following your heart wasn't as romantic when it involved destroying an expectant mother's family. Preston went completely silent. His lawyer had apparently advised him to cut all contact with me to try salvaging his marriage and custody rights. All his promises about leaving Heather for me evaporated the moment real consequences appeared. When rent came due, I couldn't make my half. I called Clayton, begging him to help me, but he'd already paid only his portion and moved out officially. The property manager started eviction proceedings within days. "Clayton, please, you have to help me. I can't make rent." And that sounds like a Preston problem. Your Preston's gone. He went back to Heather to try working things out for the kids. His assets are frozen, and he's not helping with anything. "Annabelle, we had 3 years together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything until you decided it meant nothing." And he hung up, and I knew it was really over. My mom refused to let me move back home until I went to therapy and admitted what I'd done to everyone. Marissa wouldn't take my calls after her boyfriend found suspicious charges on his credit card. Apparently, she'd been funding some of our hotel meetings without his knowledge. The Instagram story that started everything got deleted, but screenshots are forever. People were sharing it in group chats as an example of karma in action. I'd become a cautionary tale about toxic behavior and consequences. 3 months later, I was living with my aunt in her spare bedroom, working a retail job that barely covered my basic expenses. My credit was ruined, my social circle had evaporated, and my family relationships were strained beyond repair. I heard through mutual friends that Clayton had started seeing someone new, a nurse who apparently appreciated his caring, attentive nature. The same qualities I'd found suffocating were exactly what she valued in a partner. They seemed genuinely happy together from what I could see on social media. Preston's marriage survived after intensive counseling. His Instagram was full of family photos, him, Heather, their toddler, and their new baby. They looked like the perfect family, completely recovered from the chaos I'd helped create. My 8 months with him had been reduced to a footnote in their love story. The worst part was realizing that everything I'd complained about regarding Clayton, his need to know where I was, his questions about my day, his attention to details, had all been because he actually cared about me. He'd been picking me up at 2 a.m, not because he was controlling, but because he loved me enough to lose sleep for my safety. I'd thrown away a man who would have done anything for me because I was bored and wanted excitement. I'd destroyed a pregnant woman's sense of security because I believed a married man's lies about his unhappy marriage. I'd manipulated my own family's perceptions because I wanted support for my selfish choices. Look, I know I made mistakes. Fine, yeah, I cheated. I lied about Chicago. I manipulated situations to make Clayton look controlling when he was just trying to protect what we had. But he pushed me to it with his constant hovering and need to know everything about my life. If he'd just trusted me and given me space, none of this would have happened. The truth is, some people just can't handle being with someone who needs freedom and excitement. Clayton was too weak to fight for our relationship when things got complicated. He chose the easy way out instead of working through our problems like adults. I'm still angry that everyone sided with him without hearing my side of the story. I'm angry that Preston lied to me about his marriage and then abandoned me when things got difficult. I'm angry that my own mother chose to believe Clayton's version of events over her own daughter's. But mostly, I'm angry that I wasted 3 years of my life with someone who couldn't appreciate what he had until it was gone. Clayton got his perfect little nurse, who thinks his controlling behavior is romantic. Preston got his happy family back. And I got labeled as the home wrecker who destroyed everything she touched. Staring east. Sometimes I scroll through their social media posts, Clayton looking genuinely content with his new girlfriend Preston, playing the devoted father and husband. They both moved on like I never mattered, like our relationships were just brief interruptions in their real lives. I guess some people get happy endings and some people get what they deserve. I'm still figuring out which category I fall into.